Chapter 2. Shadows of the Wolf. The cold Baltimore night wrapped around Frankie like a suffocating shroud. The city whispered its secrets on the breeze, its streets murmuring the kind of promises only fools believed. Frankie leaned against the black mercury coupe, his jaw tight, the sour taste of frustration and anger rising in his throat.
"So this is what you meant,"
Frankie said, his voice low and edged with bitterness.
"when you warned me about Moretti."
Charlie Russo stood a few feet away, his sharp suit catching the faint glow of a street lamp. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket with deliberate ease, the flick of his lighter casting brief shadows on his weathered face.
"Told you it wasn't gonna be easy,"
he replied, exhaling smoke that curled around him like a veil.
Moretti doesn't just let people walk away from what they owe.
Frankie stared at him, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides.
"Yeah, you warned me, but hearing it and seeing it are two different things. My old man's got one foot in the grave, and Moretti's got his hand on the shovel."
Charlie shrugged, his expression unreadable.
"You're home now, Frankie. And home's got rules. Moretti's just one of them."
The name churned in Frankie's gut like acid. Vito the Wolf Moretti, a name whispered in dark corners and spat through clenched teeth. The kingpin of Little Italy didn't just control Baltimore's underworld, he suffocated it. His reach extended far beyond the city, pulling strings in New York, Philadelphia, and God knew where else. Men like him didn't just demand respect, they enforced it with fists, bullets, and shallow graves. Frankie pushed off the car, his boots crunching on the loose gravel. His jaw tightened, his voice like steel.
"Rules are for people who accept them. Moretti doesn't know it yet, but I don't play by anyone's rules."
Charlie watched him go, exhaling smoke into the crisp night air.
"You better hope you're as good as you think you are,"
he muttered, his voice almost too quiet for Frankie to hear. The cold air bit at Frankie's face, but the chill couldn't match the icy determination settling in his chest. If Moretti wanted a fight, Frankie wouldn't back down. But he needed allies, people who knew the streets, the players, and the rules of this dirty game. The smell of motor oil and burnt rubber hit Frankie as he stepped into Jimmy O'Donnell's garage, a converted warehouse on the edge of the city. The space was dimly lit, the fluorescent bulbs overhead buzzing faintly as they fought to stay alive. Tools hung in neat rows on the walls, their gleaming surfaces a stark contrast to the rust-streaked cars scattered across the floor. In the back, Jimmy crouched over the hood of a Chevy Impala, his broad shoulders hunched as he fiddled with a carburetor. His nickname, Smoke, came from his sniper days in the Corps. He could make targets disappear like vapor. Now, grease streaked his face and arms, a different kind of battlefield.
"Hey, Jimmy."
Frankie called, his voice cutting through the hum of machinery. Jimmy glanced up, a faint grin tugging at his lips.
"Frankie James. Heard you were back. Thought you'd be too smart to come knocking. Here."
Frankie walked over, his boots scuffing against the concrete.
"Guess you thought wrong."
Jimmy stood, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. His gaze flicked over Frankie, taking in the hardened lines of his face, the tension coiled in his shoulders.
"You look like hell,"
Jimmy said.
"What's eating you, man?"
"Fucking Moretti."
Frankie said flatly. Jimmy's grin faded, replaced by a low whistle. He leaned against the car, crossing his arms.
You're diving headfirst into hell, Frankie? The wolf doesn't play nice.
Frankie's expression didn't waver.
I'm not asking for a pep talk, Smoke. I need intel.
Jimmy sighed, tossing the rag onto the workbench.
You don't mess with Moretti unless you've got a death wish. His enforcer, Bobby Vella, that guy's a goddamn wrecking ball. And his kid brother, Paulie. Well, Paulie's a special kind of stupid.
Frankie arched an eyebrow.
Special how?
Jimmy smirked, shaking his head.
Paulie's got a gambling problem. Likes to run his mouth, too. If there's a crack in Moretti's armor, it's him. But don't mistake him for harmless. He's still got the wolf's blood in him, and that makes him dangerous.
Frankie nodded, filing the information away.
Where can I find him?
Jimmy gestured toward the door.
Rye Benny's pool hall in Highlandtown. Paulie's there most nights, blowing cash and pretending he's hot shit. Just don't get yourself killed, Frankie. I don't need another ghost in my shop.
Frankie smirked faintly.
Thanks, Smoke. I'll owe you one.
You already do.
Jimmy shot back, his grin returning.
Now get out of here before someone sees us talking.
The Anchor was the kind of bar where the lights were kept low to hide the stains on the floor and the desperation in people's faces. Frankie stepped through the heavy wooden door, the smell of stale beer and cheap cologne hitting him like a brick wall. A jukebox wheezed out an old Otis Redding tune, the static crackling like a dying radio. Behind the bar, Danny Reyes moved with the precision of a man who'd spent too many years dodging trouble. He was lean, his sharp features softened only slightly by the dim light. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Frankie approaching.
Jimmy said, "You'd be coming."
Danny said, his voice low and steady.
Didn't say why.
Frankie leaned against the bar, his gaze scanning the room. A few regulars hunched over their drinks, muttering to themselves, or to no one at all.
I need information.
Frankie said.
And I hear you're the guy who has it.
Danny raised an eyebrow, wiping a glass with a rag that looked as tired as he did.
It depends on the information and what you're offering in return.
How about not bringing my trouble into your bar for starters?
Frankie shot back, his tone edged with dark humor. Danny snorted.
Fair enough. What's the trouble?
Vito Moretti.
Frankie said, keeping his voice casual, though his jaw tightened as he spoke the name. Danny froze for a split second, his hand stilling on the glass.
The wolf shit, man. You're playing a dangerous game.
Yeah, well, I've always liked games.
Frankie said.
What can't you tell me?
Danny set the glass down and leaned on the bar, his voice dropping to a whisper.
Moretti's got half this city in his pocket and the other half too scared to cross him. His enforcer, Bobby Vella, that guy doesn't just break bones, he enjoys it. But his kid brother, Paulie, now that's a weak link if I've ever seen one.
Frankie's lips curved into a faint smile.
What makes Paulie a weak link?
Danny shook his head, a flicker of pity crossing his face.
The kid's a fuck-up. Gambles too much, drinks too much, talks too much. Moretti keeps him on a short leash, but Paulie's the kind of guy who chews through it just to see what happens.
Where can I find him?
Frankie asked. Danny hesitated, glancing around the bar.
Benny's pool hall. But listen, man, you go after Paulie, you're poking the bear. Moretti doesn't take kindly to people messing with his family.
Frankie's smile didn't reach his eyes.
Good. I want him to notice.
Danny sighed, rubbing a hand over his face.
You're either brave or stupid, James, probably both.
Frankie straightened, tossing a few bills on the bar.
Moretti isn't the only one that doesn't like his family being fucked with. Thanks for the advice.
Don't thank me.
Danny muttered.
Just don't bring this shitstorm back here.
Frankie stepped out into the night, the air sharp with the mingling scents of diesel and decay. His mind churned as he pieced together the fragments of information he'd gathered. Moretti's empire was vast, his enforcer brutal, and his kid brother reckless. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement as Frankie made his way back to Charlie's Mercury. The car gleamed under the dim glow, a silent witness to the night's revelations. Charlie was leaning against the hood, his cigarette glowing like a dying ember.
You get what you need?
Charlie asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. Frankie nodded, his expression grim.
Moretti's got a weak link. His brother, Paulie.
Charlie chuckled darkly.
Paulie? That kid's a joke, but a dangerous one. You planning to use him?
Frankie's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing.
If he's the thread that unravels Moretti, then yeah, I'll use him.
Charlie shook his head, exhaling a plume of smoke.
Just don't forget, kid. Threads can snap, and when they do, everything falls apart.
Frankie didn't respond. He climbed into the passenger seat, the leather cold against his back. As Charlie started the engine, the growl of the Mercury filled the silence. The city stretched before them, dark and unyielding, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. Frankie stared out the window, his mind churning with plans and possibilities. He wasn't just fighting for his father, he was fighting for himself. And in a city like Baltimore, survival wasn't guaranteed. It had to be earned, one brutal step at a time.